From Barangaroo Studios, the ausbiz COB is the key stuff you need to know about the day in business and finance.
Good afternoon. Well, we have power, don't we? But Danny, you were offline a lot of today, weren't you? You could not get your texts going. What a day. But anyway, good afternoon. Welcome to the COB. I'm Juliette Sarli.
Yes, and I'm Danny Akuye. And what a day it was, because well, in spite of half of Australia or 10 millions of Australians being offline, we have managed, I think, to have a green on-screen day. And
pretty flat, I think. Let's just get the boards up. Because
I've got the ASX 200 is current.
Up 0.2%. Wow, so it's all turned in the last little while. Okay, the SIBO there, pretty flat though.
Yeah, SIBO flat, but the ASX 200 up about 13 points. And as Jill said, 0.2%. But really, today was all about
the Optus outage, or outrage, shall we say. Certainly, as you said, 10 million customers affected. They're still only just coming back online now. They have said that it was not a cyber attack.
No.
It does seem like it might have been one of those updates, because they occur overnight.
The good old updates, hey?
Yeah, it went down at 4. You went to the gym at 5, as you do.
6.
6, right. You get up at 5. Sorry, I get caught. Anything before 7 is nighttime in my world. But you know, and you were saying you couldn't get your phone to work. You didn't know what was going on.
Yeah, absolutely. So Andrew and I were both furiously restarting our phones a couple of times until we vaguely, well, then I got home to the house that had Telstra and worked out that the outage was there. But look, this is really serious for Optus, and it's huge. Also serious, I think, for everybody to just realise that, you know, how connected we are, our infrastructure, how important it is. And, you know, quite frankly, a lot of infrastructure across the world hasn't been invested in properly. And, you know, everything's fine until it's not
Until it's not. And you think about all of these things that didn't work. People like you that wanted to go down and get a coffee couldn't use your phone, your Apple Pay. It's been a huge thing, and of course we are still trying to work out what was behind it. Worth noting, of course, Optus was taken over by Singtel several years ago, I think 2017. Singtel shares in Singapore have been under pressure, and of course, as you would expect, the beneficiaries have been the likes of Telstra. We had Scott Phillips from Motley Fool saying, look, this is where you start to see the potential beneficiaries, because Telstra is working very closely on its 5G network. Is it going to pick up not only individuals who are outraged, as we say, but also businesses? But James Hardie, another key story today.
Yeah, great results coming out of James Hardie. It looked like there was a lot of short covering going on today. We'll check in and see how the stock price went, but at one stage it was up about 14%. So basically they are managing what is a very challenging environment over in the US, over in Europe. Costs coming out of the business, as the CEO said, we're focusing on what we can control versus what we can't control. So record cash flow coming out of the company, and of course a $250 million share buyback to be conducted over the next 12 months. So yet again, another example how bifurcated the results are, and we'll be all waiting. Of course, we've got NAD tomorrow, and also tech companies like Xero and Technology One coming up over the course of the next week.
And okay, when we go fill up our cars next week, because it always takes a week to reflect.
At least.
Are we going to be paying a little bit less, because oil back at levels we haven't seen since July?
Absolutely. It's really interesting that we are seeing quite a slump, not only in oil but also in metals prices. It apparently very much derived from those China trade data that we saw yesterday, and while imports were okay, it's the exports. There's also some very, very weak data coming out of Germany and Europe, which almost looks deflationary. So, you know, typically when you look at commodities, metals, oil, they're all, if the prices are starting to sink, it is a canary potentially in the coal mine moment for economic growth slowing. So let's all just keep that in mind, given that there's still always so much concern over inflation.
Absolutely. All right, let's check in on some of the sectors, and we mentioned the telcos certainly in focus today. Excuse me, I've got a tickle in my throat as well. Just bringing those telcos up in terms of what we saw from the sector moves. There we go. Telstra closing the session, or about to close the session, up by 1.7%. TPG Telecom, Spark New Zealand Aussie Broadband all moving higher. Hutchison there fairly flat.
And we're also going to have a look at the technology sector because we had a great lead in from NASDAQ overnight. And there we can see Block back in the green, up over 3%, but pretty much across the board gains, particularly with Altium up by over 2%.
And moving in on the miners, I mean, base metals were very heavily sold off in the London session. BHP, Rio drags on our market today. Fortescue coming under pressure too, but looks still above $23. And that was a stock that people had said was overbought at 21. South 32 down 4.1% today.
Yeah, and let's have a look at the energy sector. As we've just been discussing, weakness in the oil price really only manifested itself in Woodside and Santos, which were slightly in the red, but Ampol, Viva Energy and Beach all positive for the day.
All right, well, we talked about a lot of those top stories, but we'll have a look again. James Hardie, of course, really rising on that outlook, up by almost 14%. We touched on the miners there. And then Magellan was an interesting one, Danny, with its AGM today.
Yes, all I could catch up was that John Eales almost got crash tackled off of the board. So I think that was another media outlet having a little bit of a laugh. Yeah, that was an AGM there. Now, I found this chart and I thought it was really quite interesting. So to quote one of our regular guests, and his name is Martin Crabb, I love a good chart. And for all of you investors out there that are concerned about shorts, this is the S&P's latest ranking of the top 10 highest share borrowings. And Pilbara Minerals is sitting up there with 20% outstanding, Genesis and Sierra around 16, and so it goes, Appen, Core Lithium.
So just for those of us who don't really understand this, what does it mean though exactly?
So basically you have to borrow the shares in order to short them because you're not allowed to have a naked short.
Right, okay.
So if, for example, that you're putting your order into a trading platform and by accident you press sell instead of buy and you sell shares, basically that's called a naked short. So you're selling them because you think that the share price is going to drop and you buy them back at a level lower, but you have to, institutions and hedge funds, etc., they have to borrow the stock. So this is the outstanding amount that has actually been borrowed. A lot of them aren't new names: Mesoblast, Bank of Queensland, IDP, Weebit Nano, Appen. They're kind of all the names that have been there, but just bear that in mind when you do see some of the share prices take a tumble, or conversely, when shorters have to cover.
Yeah, all right. Well, Pilbara at the top there. But the stock of the day for us was James Hardie. We had guests Michael Wayne from Medallion Financial, Sean Cartwright from Anandara Asset Management.
It's pretty hard to put a buy on it right here. I'd probably say we'd look to buy if it was to fall another 10%, pull back to where it was. I think that they'll continue to do really well, and I think profits and revenue will increase. I think what we see, some of the reports we've read, is that as housing prices increases, renovations increase, and increased renovations obviously help companies like James Hardie. I think if you've got it, certainly hold it. I wouldn't put a buy on it right now, not until it pulled back a little bit.
Pretty enviable position for this company to be in. They are very high quality. It's potentially a bit counterintuitive given everyone's pretty pessimistic on housing markets domestically and overseas. But this is one that we do hold for a lot of people, and we're happy to buy more off the back of the good report. Again, there is still a lot to play out within the broader landscape that James Hardie plays in, so I wouldn't be increasing your weighting too much. But if you don't hold it, we'll be comfortable to add this to a portfolio.
Welcome to the COB. I always forget that little drum roll that comes through. Rocco Panzerino from Macro Capital. The meeting between Prime Minister Albanese and Xi Jinping, forging this supposed strong relationship. We're hoping all these tariffs will be rolled back. Your view on the trade talks, and particularly amidst the China data we had?
Yeah, it was quite good to see. We obviously had Anthony Albanese meet Xi Jinping over in Beijing, where they discussed a few things in particular. Firstly, the Trans-Pacific Partnership. Seems it's making progress. China itself didn't have any intention of joining the Trans-Pacific Partnership last year, but it's definitely followed through. We've got Canada, Chile and Japan also involved in that, largely around the whole free trade and getting rid of these tariffs. Tariffs currently within Australia remain on lobster exports.
And wine.
And wine, which is another big one, that were introduced during the trade war. But Australian officials seem confident now that we can get these lifted. Yeah, we've got basically heading back to the Chinese market reasonably soon with wine and especially treasury wines as well. A lot of people have been watching that quite closely. So it's understood that the President has given strong indications that those tariffs are now under review, which that process generally takes around 5 months to complete. And it will go soon with sanctions on lobster and beef. So at its worst point, we had it was costing the Australian people about $20 billion at the heat of these tariffs, but it's slowly wounded down to about $2 billion. So hopefully we can get even less of that in the future.
How were the data that we saw yesterday? Because we've seen quite a big reaction in commodities markets.
Yeah, it was quite disappointing. We had overseas shipments fall by 6.4%, whereas the expectations were 3.4%. So a pretty large miss on the expectations there as well. On the flip side, it was good to see that imports grew by 3%, whereas a 5% decline was expected. So again, another big disparity there with the expectations and the actual figures, which is quite good for the iron ore shipments. Investor sentiment is quite bearish over in China at the moment. We've got valuations just about as low as they can go. And the MSCI China index is down more than 20% from its highs in January.
Ooh.
Yeah,
It's been one of the worst performers, hasn't it?
It has,
Yeah.
with 3 billion wiped off the index. On the flip side, iron ore is at a 52-week high, or thereabouts at the moment. Citi have upgraded a price of $130 a tonne.
I saw that.
We're not too far off now.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah,
What's
we're
it today?
about 125, thereabouts.
Wow.
Yep. Another one to watch out for is Thursday at midday. We do have Chinese CPI. Last reading was at 0%, so no growth at all. It's actually expected to come in at negative 0.1% this Thursday
Did
at
someone
midday.
say deflation?
Deflation.
You did earlier. So the stocks that we should watch, I mean, obviously you touched on Treasury wine. We're probably looking at A2 milk. We're looking at Fortescue with the iron ore price.
Yeah, definitely. Treasury wines, these tariffs introduced have caused their profits to drop by about 35%, which is huge. Lifting of barley tariffs are optimistic. And as I said earlier, with the 5-month review, it will take some time. So that process has just started in the last 2 weeks. There's somewhat like roll Treasury wines in the sense that they're holding a lot of their good stock back for these tariffs to be lifted and
The
opened
luxury
and send them
market,
back. Yeah, so they're keeping it pretty scarce at the moment. But they're making acquisitions as well, which we've seen over in California more recently. Guidance is optimistic with Treasury wines, especially in the second half of 2024. They're really preying on these tariffs to be lifted. So if they don't, it would be quite negative for the stock. But in the event that they do, which is likely expected at the moment, it should be quite positive. We touched on iron ore earlier. It's rallied 25% since mid-August. You've got the CEO of Fortescue, Dino Otranto, as well as lots of representatives from Rio. They're of the opinion that the economic development in China continues to be very strong, and they're quite optimistic about the future. So it's something to look at. They are quite elevated at the moment, the iron ore miners, and they've held up our market quite well. If it wasn't for them holding up over the past few weeks, we would have been at a lot lower price on the index. But they're definitely one to look at for the future as well, with significant growth targets all the way out to 2050. And Chinese stimulus that they've recently just passed has supported these iron ore imports. As we've seen with the big disparity between imports and exports there, it's really keeping it alive and supporting this iron ore price.
So interesting, isn't it? Because everybody said, oh, the iron ore price is going to fall, it's going to fall. And of course, it's done completely the opposite thing, hasn't it, Rocco?
Exactly right.
Yeah, surprises. Fantastic. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
All right, Rocco Panzarino from Macro Capital. Let's get you caught up on the after close market leaders. Brainchip Holdings.
I was doing a bit of Googling on that one. I couldn't find any reason. Imogene, they were talking about, they had a conference or a webinar today basically talking about updated results for, I think it's called MAST, their, menu therapy thing.
Right.
Yeah, James Hardie, we've discussed that one, up almost 14%, and Sayona up 8%, and Sierra Resources up 4.6%. So let's have a look at some of the laggards today. So, there we go. We can really see the South 32 being sold off the back of the fall that we saw overnight in those metal prices, as well as gold miners taking a hit, and Capricorn Metals and De Grey Mining off by over 3%. Alumina also off by 3%, and Champion Iron Ore as part of that profit taking that we saw in the big miners off by almost 3% as well.
All right, let's have a look at the small caps. Well, of course, Brainchip there, and Imugene, as we just mentioned, and rounding it out is, I don't know what that is, WA1 Resources. That looks a bit wonky, that title. Coventry and Encounter Resources, and then to the downside in the small caps, 88 Energy, Sky Network, Ardea Resources, Tivan and Legacy Iron Ore, but the biggest loss, 7.7%. So not significant in terms of, sometimes we see
Small
huge
cap
moves
land,
in the
exactly.
small caps, don't we? So you've got to work, though, I don't know how you work out that a 0% move on a 1 cent stock is 7.7%, but that is above my pay grade and my maths ability. Let's have a look as well at what we are looking at for overnight. I mean, I think the key thing here is Jay Powell speaking.
Absolutely.
And then some big earnings, Disney, Under Armour, AMC, Warner Brothers.
Absolutely. Disney, what a travail. That's really been under the pump, that one. And the day ahead for tomorrow, what can we expect? And we have the Japan trade balance for September. As Rocco was just saying, China CPI and PPI for October, which is important. Earnings reports from NAB and Orica, and a number of AGMs. Amcor, De Grey Mining, Nine, and Star Entertainment.
How exciting has this AGM season been, though? I mean, as you just say, John Eels almost tackled. There's been some yelling at Qantas. There's been
actually there's a really good article from a Qantas shareholder in a big media outlet paper. I think everybody should have a read of that one.
Right.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's been an incredibly interesting AGM season. Well, registrations, speaking of incredibly interesting, now open for our next virtual investor event. Small Caps Big Ideas is back for 2023 and will be bigger, better and faster.
If you weren't a subscriber in previous years, we bring together 10 of Australia's leading small cap fund managers to each present one high conviction idea, and this year we're throwing in a Fast and Furious special edition of The Call featuring microcaps chosen by you.
You can register to watch live or on demand at ausbiz.co/smallcaps23. That is ausbiz.co/smallcaps23. And Danny, where did we finish on the ASX? 69.95, I think.
69.95, up 18 points, almost 0.3%. And if we can gab, there we are, the CBO 200, pretty much a flat on today. And a quick check-in just at the little Aussie battler and what the futures are doing. But looks like my internet has just completely...
Uh-oh, you on Optus? Hang on.
No, I'm not. I'm actually on the internet here.
There we go. Joke. There we go.
A bad joke. Here we got the currency. So the Aussie dollar, let's just have a look at that one, because currently trading ever slow, slightly up, 64.4 cents. And in terms of the pre-market futures, currently pointing to ever so slightly in the negative. But I believe there is quite a big 10-year Treasury auction tomorrow. So people will obviously be focusing on what happens with that US 10-year Treasury yield.
And when Jay Powell's speaking too, big night ahead.
Absolutely.
We will have it all for you tomorrow here on Ausbiz. Stay with us until then. Well, see you then is what I should say.
Exactly. We'll see you bright and early tomorrow morning at 9:30, and have a great night.
Thanks.